Good afternoon and welcome to today's panel discussion on the history of St. Lucia's flower festivals and the roles of history and languages in Caribbean liberation. And this discussion is taking place at the offices of the studios of NTN at the Government Information Service in Castries, broadcast to St. Lucia, the Caribbean, and the rest of the world. And today's discussion is to take place against the background of the fact that on Sunday will be World Food Day, Sunday the 16th of October. Monday the 17th of October will be International Day for the Eradication of Poverty. And we certainly have reason to juxtapose poverty and food at this point in time in our history. But our discussion today is neither about poverty or food, but more about our flower festivals and, like I said, the role of history and languages in Caribbean liberation. And we thought at the National Reparations Committee to introduce this topic today so that over the weekend, Saturday and Sunday leading into Monday, those of you who will have waited today, and of course we tested your patience and certainly you revealed that those of you who waited this long, you have more patience than a hospital, as my father would say. But nonetheless, we will introduce our guests who today will be looking at those issues. And like I said, it's against the background of Monday, the 17th of October, being Journée Fête Magwit, the feast of Saint Margaret, the patron saint of the Magwit Flower Festival. And we every year observe our two flower festivals, Laos on the 30th of August, Magwit on October 17th. But to what extent do we really understand what we are observing, understand what we are celebrating, and the context in which we have to continue to live with those earlier aspects of life in St. Lucia, which is often introduced within the context of tales and flowers, but had to do with a very serious business. And it is within this context that our panel this afternoon, by the end of today, hopefully will have helped us better understand en anglais avec en créole, parce que Magwit c'est pas l'histoire créole nous, avec culture créole nous, avec nous en moi héritage créole, avec journée créole Carvini, avec toutes ces matières là qu'a venir ensemble comme un bouillon créole avec nous qu'a causé en anglais avec un créole aujourd'hui. So to introduce our panel, we have Jim Poulet Louisi, Governor General Emerita. Bienvenue, Madame.
Merci, merci.
And also with us is Monsignor Dr. Patrick Anthony, who is one of the founding members and driving forces behind the Folk Research Center, which is named after him, the Monsignor Dr. Patrick Anthony Folk Research Center. And of course his history is one which is well known. And our third panelist is Dr. Morgan Dalfini, a St. Lucian resident in London, a historian, researcher, poet, and certainly one who we all learn from every time we come across his writings, his teachings, his preachings, and today what he will share with us along with Dame Paulette and Monsignor Anthony. So today is also, we're going to have some focus today also on the fact that Monday, like I said, is October 17th, the United Nations Day for Eradication of Poverty, or World Poverty Day. But we will close with that aspect, and to open today's discussion, we will ask Monsignor Dr. Patrick Anthony, who is also the author of a booklet produced by the Folk Research Center many years ago, entitled The Flower Festivals of St. Lucia. And Monsignor Anthony is going to be sharing with us from whence our flower festivals cometh. Alors, Papa, pourquoi nous ca célébrer fête Magwit lundi? And if you could put that within a historical context so that we could really understand why we really should take time on Monday, those of us who haven't, to observe Fête la Magwit. Vive la Magwit! Vive la Rose!
Il parle français. Alors, papa, pourquoi? Bonjour tout le monde. Bonjour tout le monde. Good day, everybody. Vive la Marguerite.
Vive la Rose!
I see your picture, La Rose, and I blew la Marguerite. Yes, so as Earl was saying, Monday is Fête la Marguerite. And we've had the Fête la Rose, and La Marguerite is coming up. So it's a time for us to reflect on the origins of these traditions, which are very important for us in terms of our understanding of ourselves. You see, because the flower festivals are part of the history and the struggle of the resistance of our people. You know, when we always talk about people like Flogayan, those kind of people, you know, who are actually militant in terms of the brigands and so forth. They fought bloody battles to maintain our dignity as St. Lucians. The flower festivals are part of that struggle. And when you understand the origin of the flower festivals, you begin to understand how people use their intelligence, use their mind, their wisdom to survive in their context. Because you see, when you think of the flower festivals, you think of La Rose, La Marguerite, rivals, two rival societies. And you begin to talk about a society in which there was a lot of rivalry. I mean, this society which changed hands so much between rival nations, you know, so global powers, the superpowers of those days, you know, France and England. So you can begin to see the context. The social and political context is one of rivalry. And they were St. Lucians trying to survive in that context of rivalry, you know, and getting part of the thing, getting into it, you know. So I think it's very important for us to understand the power of traditions in that way. They tell us about ourselves, tell us something about ourselves. The actual origins from the research that we've done, the origins of the flower festival, they go back to what they call the festivals from Africa. Some flower festivals that are native to some parts of Africa. There are several flower traditions in different parts of Africa. Morgan has done a lot of research into the language and origins of the persons who come from St. Lucia. One of the things we know is that, and that's a fact from the research, the traditions that are surviving, that are more vibrant, are the ones that came later. You see, so the original slaves, for example, the tradition of the original slaves, a lot of those traditions have sort of somehow been buried or dissipated and whatnot, and dominant are the latecomers, as it were. So, you know, there were the freed Africans who were brought back and so forth, who were told that they can come back to St. Lucia. So we think that perhaps because the flower festival is so vibrant, it must have been part of the later tradition of Africans who came, not the original slaves who came to St. Lucia. As I said, the research is still very, very, very nascent. We are looking around to see what we can get. Some of the first documents we have that mention the flower festival go back to the 1700s. 1700s, there's a mention of them in a Levexier's letter in 1795. And later on, in some of the documents of travelers, some of the visitors to the Caribbean, for example, I remember I found a document in the library in Scotland, in the archives in Scotland, of a missionary who was passing through St. Lucia in the early 1800s. And in his diary, he wrote about how he saw those traditions. So we have got snippets from travelers and so forth. One of the sources of the tradition, and it's very important for us to recognize those sources. One of the sources that gives us a lot of information about the La Rose and La Marguerite are the local papers. You see, the Palladium, an early press, the early St. Lucian. But what one must understand is that the perspective from which those people wrote the editorials was really the perspective of the dominant class, who looked down upon them. You know, they're saying that until the lion learns to write, the story is always going to be about the hunter. Same thing, though. So when you read what's written in the Palladium, you'll hear about how there was all of this bacchanalia going on. and those persons who, the ribaldry that was going on and so forth. So the language is very condescending, but in the language,
we have to interpret.
You begin to see what is happening is that there were two powerful forces in the society. You could see that. And it seems as though those groups were flower festivals, but they were groups that were instrumental in societal development. For example, I would like to say that they were the first social development agencies. Today we're talking a lot about social engineering and whatnot, and building community centers and playgrounds and whatnot. In those days, that's the thing that they were doing. The La Rose and La Marguerite societies were building the community centers. Their halls provided that kind of resource for the community to come together. They were the ones who helped to build not only their own centers, but institutions like the churches. The churches were built but couldn't be, but the dominant forces were, the societies were the ones who were pushing it. So that you had certain churches that they were claiming, say l'église la Magwit, say l'église la was faite, and so forth. So the role of the society in terms of social engineering, I think is very important. Reconstruction, community development, that's very important.
But how did that rivalry between two forces, one set that is inclined to the British, the other set inclined to the French, but in a Christian society, from the standpoint that Christianity is both French and English, and therefore, how was there a truce when it came to church work? How did they put the rivalry aside?
Okay.
No, actually, in fact, putting jokes aside, I mean, the societies were very serious business. That's very serious business. And sometimes the rivalry got very, 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 very bad, to the extent that one society would burn down the whole of another one, And when it got so bad at one point, the Catholic Church actually excommunicated both societies. There was a time when if you were Catholic, you could not belong to any of those societies because you were excommunicated because of an attempt to try to stop the violence that was going on between them. So I mean, it started as rituals, and I guess Mohan can talk a little about the rituals later on, but it developed into a kind of a very, very strong, violent antagonism in the societies.
Nou ka vie cause asusa Creole tizing plita. Dr. Dalfini, you have written and published and spoken quite a lot on our African connection or the African connection to a lot that we take for granted culturally. I was wondering to what extent you could put our discussion on the roots of St. Lucia's Flower Festival within the context of the the communication between the two sides, but it also, like Papa indicating, having to do with, it's not something that people just dreamed of some morning. The issue of flower festivals is something that came across the oceans as well.
Yes, I'd say that African oral literature, literature which was not written, was there before everything else. And that kind of literature was, if you like, the main means of communicating feeling and thought to Africans within Africa, which we then later on brought here. So that in terms of basic things, you'd have a festival. So I attended what was called a Kompo festival in Senegal, in which the devotees, the secret people, come out of the forest dressed up in masks, etc. But you, as the audience, were expected to take some sticks and follow in terms of chanting. So it would go like this: Yadiko na pintia se penti valero ninki nanka di Sanchaba. So the great dragon of Sanchaba is coming out. We, the followers, are following and beating sticks. And all of Africa had that kind of tradition. So if you went even in terms of places like Ethiopia and Somalia, there were songs where the poets contested. They'd be saying that my king is the greatest king, and the other poet, their job was to say their king was the greatest. You then had other kind of song traditions. For example, among the Zulu, you could only have your praise songs, your izibongo, as long as you could dance and as long as you had achieved. So you could get up to dance, but you could only dance, let's say, if you'd been in 10 battles, you could dance 10 battles of your praise songs, 10 battles of the people chanting your name. But if you had only one, your dance would be short. Then there were also traditions in which some people knew the history of the clan or the group from the beginning right to the end. And if they made a mistake, in some cases they'd be killed. So the person who kept all of the history knew it word for word, not in terms of writing, but again in terms of the oral literature. So as far as Africa is concerned, we're coming into the new world with rich traditions. Some of the traditions are quite specific. Let's take in Mali, the Empire of Mali, there was a great leader called Sunjata, and his instrument was the xylophone. He brought music into the system. And lots of those people ended up as black Americans. So you hear the black Americans talking about their jelly, the kind of griot. All of those words come from the Senegambian area. So as far as oral literature and music, we have been doing this since the dawn of time. Specifically in terms of some influences in St. Lucia, some of them come both from the older people who were there, the first ones here from Africa, and from the later ones. So the song I always chant a bit of is the ones from the Congo. Ti Congo asula me mama, dendelo ti Congo asula me papa. Dendelo, the little Congolese, some of the earliest people, are on the waves, mother. These songs are people talking about their laments, bringing it into St. Lucia. Some of the laments come from elsewhere. Let's take the Dahomian ones. Many of the people there are some of the people who ended up in Haiti, the Arada people. And they would be singing songs such as, they were betrayed, you know, that Arada betrayed me. So they bring their laments in terms of their songs. You also have got some specific rivalries in Africa. For example, the classic ones are the Chui, the Ashanti people, versus the coastal people, the Fanti. The Ashanti were very military and expanded, and the Fanti were on the coast. So they were into natural rivalries, making the Fanti become pro-European, because the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Here are these military people coming down on me. Here are the white people at the coast. I will be friends with them. So you have the story of Fanti Rose and Shanti Rose. The Ashanti Rose and the Fanti Rose. So it wouldn't be a long stretch of the imagination to say the pro-European view and the anti-European view were with us long before we arrived on these shores. When we arrive on these shores, we still continue with our traditions, but they are, as Paba pointed out, contextualized within the society. And the kind of tension is between the French and the English. So the Magwits were getting their support from English planters. They'd be looking for money and funding for their festivals from the English. The Lawazis would be going to the French shopkeepers, French planters, in order to get their money for their festivals. As Paba said, this resulted in violence. There would be violence on the streets in St. Lucia between those societies. And in the song made famous by Sesen, where she talks about Wadlo kachwe mama, Wadlo jachwe papa, Wadlo se kana, Wadlo se kandla move. So the Wadlo, the English, is viewed by the Lawazis in a negative way. Okay? They're saying that the English, the wicked duck, is the one who has caused me pain. So this gives you some of the tension within our societies. Sometimes you could also say that we, if you like, embellish these things further. Why do we embellish them? Because within the African setting, they had two kinds of strands. One part was called criticism, and the other one was called praise. In Hausa, they would be talking about kirari, which are the praise songs, and habechi, which are the songs of criticism. So calypso is typical of that kind of form. And calypso kaiso is a word which you can then take into Hausa kaito, meaning you don't give a damn attitude. Okay? So the people in those societies are still carrying out the same acts. If you're a Magwit, you'd be doing your criticism of Laos. Laos pa vo ayen, Laos se pa moun l'église, Laos se mauvais moun. At the same time, you'd be praising la Magwit. Mi Magwit se moun ki bon, mwen diou se nou ki Magwit. Upa wenu wa Magwit, upa wenu wen Magwit, se nu ki bel moon. So the praise and the criticism. And the Lawazes do the same thing. And in a sense, what this takes us to is, what have we done with these traditions in the New World? What have we done in Black America with that? We have the people making criticism at times, as well as praise. You've got James Brown saying, I'm black and I'm proud, say it loud. That's the kind of praise view. But you also have negative trends, particularly in the modern times, where people are, if you like, having a negative view of black women. They call them all types of names, in terms of Yosef's Jabal movie, and they'd be using that as part of, if you like, a critique. But we have lost, in a sense, within the forces of power with which we've confronted, the kind of praise of the positive, the praise towards education. We are family. The praise in terms of trying to attain things. We have gone into, under the forces of the powers that we face, into negative forms and negative critiques of ourselves and some of our traditions. So what I'm trying to say is, we have been oral poets, poetesses, singers for millennia of years. We have had differences of opinion in Africa, and we have used these forms to express them. We're then localized in St. Lucia, and we continued the same thing. The challenge, though, is how do we use these things for positive educational purposes? How do we mobilize ourselves in terms of doing things which are positive? We have people saying to us, and I think it's very positive, why are we importing lettuce and tomatoes when we can grow this stuff here? Why haven't I heard a song saying, where Mamai I planté leti, nous ni glo isia? Why am I not hearing those songs to back up the positive policies? Okay? And that for me is the challenge of where we go to. Qui manière nous ka mette pied devant? Nous ja mette chaque pied devant, mais nous ka aller derrière. Qui manière nous ka lever kon nous, aller devant encore.
Et que nous avons parler avec vous à ce sujet ça là, parce que il est très important après nous garder tout ça qui j'ai passé côté nous sorti côté nous et après nous ni pour garder côté nous aller qui ça qui mener nous là avec lever point nécessité pour nous ça faire indication. And that takes us to Dimperlet, who one of the commonalities on this platform today is the history of the efforts to achieve Creole where it is today. 4 decades ago, Dimperlet and Monsignor Anthony and many others, some still with us, some have gone along. We climbed mountains and crossed rivers to try and introduce the whole concept of the importance of Creole. Back then, it was accepted that only 40% of St. Lucians spoke English, and that Creole was the majority language, but it was not official, and therefore we were having problems getting people to accept that Creole is worthy of not just speaking but teaching and studying. And when Dr. Dalvini mentioned the question of oral history. That brings us, that's where I came to understand the importance of oral history, because we were able to get through that process of researching Creole. We were able to get the history of life before us, which is not recorded in the Palladium and the Voice and in those accounts by persons who were not of us. James, you have had quite a lot of experience in terms of languages and the importance of language. And we cannot just say, well, language is important, because without language people can't communicate. But if you could put the importance of languages within the context of what we've been discussing, the history of our flower festivals, and the rivalry, which was artificial, so to speak, but real in life from the standpoint of what it meant. Your take on where we are today, Dame Paulette?
I've always felt that perhaps we in St. John have this ambivalence towards Creole. I mean, we like the fact that we speak Creole, and perhaps that makes us different from other people. But on the other hand, we don't see the value of it. For us, it's inferior to the European languages, the imported languages. So that when and you can see why perhaps we feel that, you know, this what is coming from away, you know, is so much better than what is ours. And so I think, I mean, the disservice we're doing ourselves is that we are not appreciating ourselves. And it's not just not appreciating our language, but that translates to all other aspects of, you know, of our life, of our culture, our identity. We always seem to think that what has come from across the seas is much better. And that is the problem we have in getting people to understand that if this is how you feel about yourself, what is yours, it's very difficult, you know, to celebrate yourself or celebrate, you know, your people, because you always see them in, even you see yourself in this, you know, negative light. Mm-hmm. So people would say, why speak Creole, or why teach Creole in schools? Because out there, I mean, it's English or it's French or it's Spanish. That is what counts. That's what matters. But and so that is why I think we really need to get down to teaching people to realize that, I mean, no matter what you think of, I mean, people used to think, you know, it was a bastard language. Breen called it a language spoken by old
toothless
people, by toothless old women. Then say, no, that's just even now people you say, oh, Creole, you know, they say, even the word patois. I mean, we talk about patois, but a lot of people don't realize that patois is not necessarily that pejorative or derogative. It is just, you know, a level of language. You know, you come from PG and you go up to patois, Creole. So that is what we need to understand, that this is who we are. We are Creole people. And unless you accept that, then the liberation, mental or otherwise, you know, I mean, all of us know about, I mean, we just celebrated, well, not celebrated, we observed emancipation, and we were free, we say. Bob Marley tells us, you know, is the mental slavery that we need to pay attention to now. So, you know, you've got to be free, to be yourself. You've got to understand who you are. This is us. This is what we have, and to appreciate it. So the history, our history, unfortunately, we can't change history. That was what was imposed on us. But by now, with the world opening up and understanding, like we got this explanation and this history from Morgan, we understand, where we came from, and then start to appreciate ourselves. That's who we are. That is ours. The Creole is ours, and therefore should be given, that status. And that is how we will liberate ourselves. Even Derek Walcott, in a lot of his poems, talks about his language. There's this one, "Come back to me, my language," and language as redemption, language as reclamation of who you are. And that is what I think we need to see Creole not just as the language, but as the soul of a people who came. We brought some things from Africa. Well, yes, and we assimilated. We have done a bit of, the European assimilation, but in so doing, we have created a unique, identity, a Creole identity. Now, in St. Lucia is the French Creole, but in the other islands in the Caribbean, they are English Creoles. And so if you look at the way Barbadians, for example, perceive themselves, even the expressions, when you look at Israeli, the translation from, it's the English form, and it's the, when you say, "Zien nous fait cat," in the Barbados, you say, "Our eyes made four," So it is to understand who the Caribbean, who we are as Caribbean people, a specific identity, a Caribbean people, a Creole people. And then Creole is not just simply the language. It is the culture, is the way of life. It is the coming together of forces, that has created something unique and something special. And we need to appreciate that uniqueness, and translate that uniqueness into positivity, economic, creative, you name it. You have this this differentiation which makes us apart. It's true we are in globalization, but even within globalization there is differentiation. And so we are Caribbean people. We are Creole people. So Creole language, Creole culture, Creole identity. I think it was Dr. Anthony who said it's a rainbow, it's a coming together, a confluence, of persons, of thoughts, of ideas. And that is what Creole is all about.
In fact, the whole concept of, like we said, oral history, I joined FRC after the movement had already started with the likes of Paba, yourself, Amel Matrin, and others, you as a school teacher, principal, etc. And what the point you made earlier, we were not just looking to popularize a language or to learn a language, but the process brought with it the history, the culture, the what being Creole is, and therefore a movement grew out of that, from Journée Creole to Semaine Creole to Moi Héritage Creole. But in the period we're looking at, the second half of your life, if I can say, you made an indelible contribution to the preservation of and respect for our Creole culture, because in your 20 or so years as Governor General, I recall that at every throne speech that you presented on behalf of Her Majesty the Queen, there was a Creole element. And that is something that has not been repeated in the way that you did it. But while there were those who were saying, oh, how she bringing Creole in that. There, we always used to have to explain to people that what we have to see is that you will bring in what we call the royal respect to Creole from the standpoint. Si gouverneur sa parle Creole, kay konsit, ki moun nou ye nou pa sa parle. Is that anything close to what was intended?
Yes, I think I have to admit that I started, the Creole bit at the specific request of the then Prime Minister, Dr. Anthony, who thought that, there should be more inclusivity as far as the people out there. We know that people sometimes, they hear the English, they understand it, but, it doesn't hit them. It is gut. For me, the Creole is the gut, and English is cerebral. You hear the thing in your head, yes. But
it's like I like to make that point. It's like how old people used to tell you you're ungrateful. The English would say you ingrate or you're ungrateful. My grandmother would say "wengwa," and it's coming up from the stomach.
From the stomach.
Yeah,
yes.
and you feel it. And sorry for that interjection.
Yeah, but I'm saying, and that is how it began. And I really got a sense of how people, sort of accepted and welcomed this thing. By the time I left the
Government house.
Not even government house. After I have delivered the through
everybody, yes,
including ministers, the members of parliament would come and say, but I heard this word, but that's the first, and you could see their reaction. When you are delivering it, when I was delivering the throne speech, the English version, everybody be sitting there. Sometimes with their eyes closed, and you wondered sometimes whether they really were following. But the moment I paused and I said, Monsieur Président, Monsieur Speaker, everybody, you can do a sequoia, and you could see, you could see them following the expressions, and you could see when they recognized something they hadn't heard for a while, and the way, because it was not just a translation of it was getting the sense of what a passage meant and delivering it. So, Creole is a lot of imagery. So all those expressions and, that I would try to bring in, and, So I know it really did have an effect. I have to admit, though, there was one gentleman who thought, who wasn't for this thing at all. Actually did call me to ask me how I can go, how can I be speaking, Creole? The Queen wouldn't speak Creole. I said, well, I don't know about that. But I had to say, but Governor General, is head of state of St. Lucia. St. Lucia is a Creole-speaking country. So what's so bad about that? Well, he didn't think that it was. So I said, and he was an elderly gentleman. So I said, let's agree to disagree, And I have to admit, if you ask people, what memories they have of my 20 years out there, it was really usually, two things. The throne speech in Creole and the hats.
And your hats.
And another thing that made me realize that St. Lucians, although a lot of them don't speak Creole, the Creole touches them in a way that English doesn't. I remember at one point, some years ago, we had some problems at Sir Arthur, and the whole educational fraternity went on strike, over this. So the Board of Governors asked me to come out and explain the situation and do it in English and in Creole. Now, before that, schools were closed, and so I went, I gave my piece in English, and then I said it in Creole. And the moment they said, mais c'est ça, C'est ça qui a fait là, alors. And next day, they understood it. It touched them, and then I realized that the power of the Creole language for St. Lucians. So while they feel that that's not taken anywhere, computer parler Creole and all these kinds of things, it is us. And we, the more we fight it, the more it pulls us. It pulls us, and we might fight and fight. But even the Jeune Creole, I mean, when we did it the first year in was it 82 at in Monrepo, I just say, "Qui bêtise ça? Qu'est-ce que ça fait Jeune Creole ça?" And now, what I mean? Everybody's
the one
in
at
it.
Moshi.
Yes, everybody's in it. So people, it is ours. I mean, just if we don't accept what is ours, it's just like food. Everybody made a lot of fuss when they say eat bananas.
That's
But
right.
but it is ours, and we will buy potato chips from elsewhere. So why can't we eat banana chips or plantain chips or dashing chips? Unless we see that we are worth, that we have some value as a person, as a people, it take us a while before we get to where we should be in this international arena.
Power, it's as a follow-up to the appreciation of our language, our culture, and the ability of Creole to manifest that by us and on our behalf. I was in a discussion in which the other side was saying to me that Creole is more appreciated in and by the St. Lucians in the diaspora than at home, because for two reasons. One, you can use it, it's more homely abroad, and secondly, is that it identifies you as a St. Lucian. But is that enough? Is that what we want from Creole? The ability to say is ours and to show that we can speak it. But where does the aspect that Morgan mentioned, to use Creole to say, "À nous planter manger, à nous manger ça nous planter," because post-Ukraine war, the food crisis is here because the prices have gone up phenomenally. But we have, for the past 20 to 30 years, CARICOM has been preaching food security and the importance of buying local and growing local, etc. That has been ignored. But within the past year, we've had Breadfruit Festival, Fig Festival, Châtaigne Festival, Mango Festival,
This is good.
and in each case, people are coming out and rediscovering something we had taken for granted. So, how do we make that link between knowing that Creole is ours, but also putting it to work for us in approaching solutions to our problems?
Well, it's basically what Morgan said, that you see, we have to grow in self-understanding. If you don't understand where you're coming from, who you are and whatnot, you will always like somebody else. You will always be, your future will be determined by others. You will not chart your own course. You will not, so it's a question of self-understanding. And you were talking about what I guess people like Bernard Bernice has called creolity. Creolity it's not just language, it is an experience. It is something that is uniquely ours. It's an experience that we are creating in this new world context, in this context, that it's it is put on mute. It is yeah, it's a question of recognizing that we have a unique contribution to make towards global civilization. The experience of creolity. It's a unique experience. Nobody, if you have not been there, you don't know what it's all about. And we're depriving the world of that experience when we look down upon ourselves, when we negate ourselves. The world is poorer because that experience, other people don't have it. We have an experience that is so uniquely ours, you know. And so the language is just part of that self-understanding. I mean, people, just take simple like Derek Walcott. Derek Walcott have always told people that his language is not just English. It's not just English. Derek has brought a tone, a tonality, what he calls tonality, which is the Creole experience that can only come out of a Creole context. So that when you're reading the English, it's not just English you're reading, you're entering into an experience. And it's that experience that made him unique. It's that experience that gave him the Nobel Prize. It's not a language, English, you know. It's so what we call the tonality, what we call creolity, what we call the local experience. And so when we understand that, then we go back to what we call the positives. When we can begin to understand that, my gosh, wow, what a resource we have, what a wealth we have. Our experience is the wealth. And from that, we can then use that to pass on, to educate our children and so forth. So it's an understanding of the depth and the value of our experience. It manifests itself sometimes in certain creative forms and whatnot, but the manifestation is out of a deeper something. And it's that deeper something we must understand that it is our souls. Basically, it's our souls. It's our souls, you know? And so out of our souls comes the creativity, and that's what the positive is. If you really believe that your soul is so rich, it's so deep, and out of that can come so much, then a new world, a new society, new values, all of that can come out of there. But you see, if you believe that you don't have a soul, you know, you have to go somewhere else for people to validate you. You have to look outside for what is good, what is bad. You know, you are literally dying. You're dying. You're dying. You know. So all the people talking about what they call development, it's really underdevelopment. I mean, it's all wrong. You said how Europe underdeveloped. You know? So people in the name of development, they're underdeveloping. You see, because they don't understand, and there's nothing as dangerous as ignorance. Understand? It's dangerous as that.
Morgan, I saw indications that you wanted to interject while Jim Pullett and Monsignor Anthony were speaking, but in coming to you, quite apart from responding to whatever points they might have raised that you would like to give your view on, I also know that as a historian, you have written, your latest book is about the longest period of St. Lucia's history documented from the 1600s to 19 something. I have heard references to it as a manifesto for reparations as well. Could you tell us about the book and whether and where within we would be able to put today's discussion in context in your book, or vice versa, where your book puts today's discussion in context?
I'd say the book itself, available on Amazon, is a book which takes this long period of St. Lucian history and then asks questions of the modern world, of modern St. Lucia. I mean, on a basic part, in the African part, what it talks about is the places where we came from, which are basically Senegambia, Dahomey, Congo within the French domain, and Ghana and Nigeria in the English later domain. So, I mean, in the later domain, I would plant this guy in Igbo land straight away, no problem. Okay, facial type, everything. So, and also factually, what I did was I took a sample of the age ranges of the various groups. And what you'd find is that the younger ones were Igbos, and the older ones are Senegambians. So the correlate of the ages correlated the kind of history. Now, within that, what it's basically telling us is that Africans constructed Creole. Africans constructed that language. We were oppressed, and they did not want us to use our language because they feared slave rebellions. And they would more fear those rebellions in a place like St. Lucia, because wherever you have hills, St. Lucia and Jamaica, and wherever you have bush in places like Suriname, and we have bush here, the people ran away into the hills, created an alternate society, and at times contested the planters and plantation societies. So from their point of view, Creole was dangerous and our independence was dangerous. So they sought to suppress it. But even with the suppression that they put us under, for instance, there's a mask that plugs up your mouth and has got prongs of iron on all four sides. That's your punishment in those societies if you used a Creole, if you used an African word. Okay? So despite all of that, we managed to come out of it and say things such as Mweka vini. And then you think of Mandinka, Mweka moi, Nka moi. The ka is still there. And you then think of Jamaicans saying mi a kom, you know, this particle mi a kom. And then you think of Ghanaian chui, mere ko, the re being the a for the Jamaican. You then continue in that vein and you notice that Africans in Creole societies brought the African structure and used the words that the Europeans allowed us to use, the European vocabulary. So we created this. Now, if they fear us, they have to dismantle our confidence in ourselves. To dismantle that confidence, they sold the idea that Creole was bad. And they sold it to us, and some of us accepted it and say, ou c'est marron si vous parlez Creole. So that was the thing, how to disable our brains by making us run after our tail. You know, so your color is bad, you know. If you're light-skinned, you're good. You're brown-skinned, you're tolerable. If you're black, get back. So again, you are faced with an idea of self-hatred. And if they have you in that, then you're not going to want to win the Nobel Prize. You're not going to want to be another Arthur Lewis. You're not going to want to go that way. Now, if they contain many of us in that prison, then they have succeeded. But I think that because our ancestors made such sacrifices, we need to pick up the baton and move forward with it and put it within an education system so that naturally the children inherit the inheritance of the forefathers naturally within the school system and move forward with it. I also, although I may not go to church often, have an idea that this also has a kind of religious dimension. Because if it is the case that human beings have a dimension of themselves which is wider than just the flesh, then the notion of how do they communicate their spirit and communicate it in Creole becomes tremendously important. Because it starts with small things. When I first came to West Africa, I saw people taking water or drinks and pouring some in the ground first. And I just said, but that's what we did in St. Lucia. Before you put your little calabash in the barrel to drink some water, you drop some down. And what they're saying is they're putting some for their ancestors. The spirit was there within them, and the spirit was passed on in Creole. And then it comes to almost a biblical phrase, what doth it profit a man if he gains the whole world and suffer the loss of his own soul? If we lose our soul, then we have nothing. And so Creole, as part of that soul, is a tremendous continuity, despite everything they threw down at us, despite every kind of oppression, to say we are here and we will survive regardless. I think that this kind of perception is well borne out by Dr. Perlet's view of trying to gently coax people into the love of themselves and the respect of themselves. I think it's borne out in Paba's vocation of interpreting the words of God to man. In flesh, you interpret spirit. And I think what we have to do next is put it in the education system so that it's a natural progression. People don't have a fight about it. They know some Creole, they know some of their history, and they move on. Because I think part of the next challenge for me would be to set up a group for manufacturing and science in St. Lucia, because we're evolving our historical dimension, but what we're facing is scientific. So using the knowledge that we gained through the Folk Research Center development, a science and manufacturing group to have discussions and to see how we can move forward within the scientific world that we are faced. It's ironic, in a way, Africans created science, and we are the ones now playing catch-up. We invented medicine. We are the ones now playing catch-up. We are the ones who gave these legacies for the world, but we don't recognize that in ourselves. So, Creole is a way of moving that forward. For the book itself, it also takes on the question of the Caribs and the Arawaks, because lots of the words, or quite a number of the words, like lebiche, come from Carib. Things such as chebe, meaning to seize and to hold, bagay ka chebe mwen, you're talking Carib. So one of Tululu, Magwit, all of them. So all of those are the original eyes of the first people on these shores. And one of the facts of earlier languages is they pass on the inheritance to the later languages. So we've got all of that within the Creole. You've got the Senegambians coming first, and some of their words and structures within Creole. You then have got the Ghanaians and Igbos coming in next. Words like Beche, Beke, etc. coming from the Igbo group. Okay? So all of these riches have come in. They also bring in a kind of clear historical perspective. Some of the things that we see in the Caribbean are due to things that happened in Africa, or the reasons why we were pushed out. So a classical example is juk, okay? Ijuk mui, okay? Baeka juke mui. We have it all over the Caribbean, but we don't ask the question, where does the word come from? It's a Fulani word. Who were the Fulanis? They were what we'd call in modern times Islamic extremists. So they decided that in the whole of West Africa, from as far as Sudan all the way out, they would create jihads, holy war, against other Africans because they wanted to convert us. So they would have joked us, garçon. We would have been well joked, and they would have been responsible for pushing us out. In terms of the reference I gave between Fanti Rose and Ashanti Rose, those were conflicts. At one stage, the Fantis won against the Ashanti. The group of the Fanti were called Chromantes. Those Chromantes had the audacity to kill one of the Ashantihene, one of the kings of the Ashanti. The Ashanti swore revenge, and then when they got the chance, they pushed some of the Chromanti out. But those were military people. They ended up in Jamaica and elsewhere, and they fought and created maroon communities. And the British, once they recognized the threat, they said, we will ban Chromantis coming into Jamaica. We will ban them going anywhere, because they recognized that. But again, that's one of the other reasons why we were pushed out. So until we interpret our history within a larger history of human beings, specifically West Africa and elsewhere, we're not touching the surface. We need to also recognize other aspects of African history. Africans within West Africa were not all happy. They did not like some of what they call the feudal states. So they went south. So all of the Bantus, the Zulus, etc., are people who were fed up of the structures in West Africa. Now, until we understand that, we'll be going around saying, oh, garçon, I'm son of slaves, you know, things are tough. We'll adopt a victim pose rather than say, we fought, we won some, at other times we lost, we're here, we kept fighting, we won some, we lost some, we're fighting again. So I think that the history teaches you that, but it also poses some questions. It poses some challenging questions. If we have gone through that history, why have we not performed better? Okay? We have been independent for 40 odd years. Yet some of our educational systems are not of a good quality. It's quite clear we didn't put money there. So when I was carrying out some consultancy in one Caribbean country, I had the audacity to say, can I see the inspection reports? Garçon, you men were check morceau papier. They brought me some paper, and it had on it, visited this school, went in at 8:25, left 8:27. That's the inspection report. And while we laugh, when we look at similar things in St. Lucia, they are similar. What are we talking about? Are we talking about the quality of the education? Are we talking about what support we're giving to teachers? And when they don't perform, what are the systems of discipline we have against them? Because we're not taking it seriously. If you go in some other countries, I mean, I was in Nigeria after independence, some of the things the guys were always saying is, oh, this went wrong, it's the colonial masters, the colonial masters. And then you look around and you see large areas of land, free and fertile, and you meet dynamic and intelligent people. You go to Zambia, that I went to later on, the people have got goods coming in from South Africa that they're buying, and then you look around and you see big trees, you see fertile land. You even go in people's gardens and they're growing things such as sweet potatoes, manioc, and kalalu. But yet, the translation of that into, okay, I can make goods too. I don't have to import the goods from South Africa. So those kind of challenges to us a sum that we do not raise and we do not face. And I think the quicker we look at the quality of education that we're offering everybody in St. Lucia, indeed the Caribbean, the better for us. It cannot be that you get a good education if you're up in Castries where lots of the resources are, and if you're elsewhere, it's a bit less. Who is responsible? It cannot be the people who receive the education. We are responsible. We hold the budget. We are the people who set these things in motion. And until we get into that kind of thinking, the kind of, if you like, baton passed to us by our ancestors who suffered and who made a way even in great difficulty for us, all we're doing is then saying, look, they gave me the baton. Oh, c'est pas moi garçon. Il tombé. C'est pas moi. Ouais, c'est pas faute moi. Ou pas peut jouer moi. Garçon, ouais, moi c'est un monde qui pas vle faire rien. Ouais, ek bâton a tombé. We can't be like that.
Eh bien, nous ne pouvons pas quitter le bateau en tombé, puis tiens, à courir à son nom. Alors, pendant temps, où là, à ce c'est où qu'il y a bateau en le mot à présent, peut-être pour ça, dis-nous en créole, dernier petit mot. Ma pas dit dernier gros mot. Dernier petit mot.
Moi, pas ni grand-chose pour dire, mais chaque chanson.
Et dis, manière pour jeune livre là tout.
Oh, livre là, au cas aller sur Amazon.
Qui non livre là?
Non, livre là, c'est History and Language in St. Lucia. C'est date là, moi, oublié moi-même. Mais il commence à 16 something.
Pour 19 something.
Pour 19
300 l'année.
300 l'année. OK. Mais à ce bagay qui moi j'attends moun chanter qui moi t'ai bien aimé, yon c'était yon ba yo t'ai chanter dit après mais oui tiens manger viande là qui moun kay sous ses oua. And it encapsulates some of our historical experience. After all of these things have happened, is it us to just suck the bones? And there are other bits in terms of some of the poetry of Walcott, where he says things, and I don't mean to be irreligious in this sense. He says something, when cocks surprise themselves by shitting eggs from their asses, then black man go get rest from God. So he's challenging us to say we are responsible in those terms. And lastly, the song that haunts me a lot is that song of the Congo, where it says, Dendelo ti Congo asulame mama, Dendelo ti Congo kanaviji mama, Dendelo ti Congo kanaviji papa, Dendelo ti Congo asulame mama. So that one I found haunting, but it leads lastly into a Martinican record that I very much liked. It says, nous cap passe la mer sans bâtiment, bateau moins ouivé. Nous cap passe la mer sans bâtiment, bateau moins ouivé. Ti bateau indel sala, bateau moins ouivé. Ka passe la mer sans bâtiment, bateau moins ouivé. Meaning, despite everything I've been through, my boat has arrived. And I'd like, despite my difficulties in terms of sneezing, that we look at it as a way forward. We came from somewhere, but our boat has arrived. We have to take it. And in terms of one of the kind of things that Paba taught me once, it was a song of pulling in a boat, where halle, 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 Halle! So everybody's singing in unison
Yes,
while
yeah.
they
While
pull
they
the
pull
boat
it.
in.
Well, merci Dr. Dalfini. Nous pas kay batche kanot là.
Oh, okay.
C'est kanot nous. Dimpelet, nous ka fini conversation nous après-midi. Alors, où ça dit nous dernier yon de timo en créole à sous ce sujet nous t'ai discuter avec opinion à sous S nous j'arrivé côté nous aller avec créole.
Bon, nous, moi-même, nous avons commencé, mais c'est type. Nous ne pouvons pas quand même marcher calpate. Hein? Nous ne pouvons pas quand même arriver ça. Comme ça, nous avons un chat de travail pour faire à ce sujet créole. Et ça, je veux dire encore, on dit créole, ce n'est pas langage là tout seul pour dire, bon, qu'on parle créole ça, soit aller dans l'autre pays, est-ce que monde qui parle créole dans l'autre pays, est-ce qu'il a quitté maman ou derrière. Créole là, c'est langage là, oui, mais c'est l'âme nous, c'est culture nous, tout le monde sait juste c'est culture nous, mais qui ça qui culture nous? C'est pour nous respecter comme nous, ouais, valeur, c'est ça créole là. Créole là, c'est valeur, Jean créole. En Saint-Lucie, en Caraïbes là, comme ça, moi quand je voulais commencer à garder créole là, d'autres lunettes, si vous voulez. Parce que mon ça c'est un petit langage, personne pas ça.
Ouverzier nous plus grand.
Ouverzier nous plus grand. Et puis yo prend créole là pour bail papi chaud. Parce que créole là yo connaît parce ou ça bail une belle petite blague en créole mais sous dit en anglais, il pas qu'à faire science. Non. C'est pour nous ouais créole là.
C'est l'âme nous.
C'est l'âme nous et mais respecter. Si vous respectez créole là, vous pouvez respecter comme.
Monseigneur, dernier Timo.
Eh bien, moi, ça nous a ouais en cette ici. Manière nous commencer puis journée créole et puis après ça nous ni mois héritage créole. Ça c'est un symbole hein. Nous ouais c'est pas un mot tout seul, pas un langage tout seul, mais c'est une tradition. Hein? C'est tout ces peuples là, tout ça nous ça fait, tout ça nous créativité nous, toute oralité nous tout bail comme ça hein. Comme ça les monde ka ouais c'est pas un anti mot. Ça dit anti black qu'on dit black. Mais il peut pas c'est ça. Il sait culture nous. Il sait valeur nous. Il sait richesse nous, il sait mémoire nous. Il sait façon nous agir, manière expérience nous joindre en vivant. À comme si c'est nous ici puisque nous vivons nous vivons hein. Nous vivons à part de quantité qui veut tuer nous mais nous vivons puisque nous avons force là pour nous ça continuer à vivre. C'est il y a un langage nous mais il y a chanter nous, il y a danser nous, il y a manger nous, il y a catcher nous, il y a
nous.
C'est ça.
Il y a l'âme nous.
Merci papa avec nous qu'a souhaité que vous bien satisfait avec présentation nous après-midi nous ni trois monde qui parlait à sur l'histoire festival Flenou la rose avec la Magwit nous tenons parole à sur l'histoire avec langage en libération Caraïbe avec à présent nous avons fini à un autre sujet qui est aussi important lundi qui lundi c'est fête la Magwit mais lundi c'est aussi journée internationale contre la pauvreté and of course International Day against poverty or for poverty reduction is observed on the 17th of October every year, this coming Monday, and therefore every year when we observe the Fête la Magwit, we should also try to remember that it is the day when we all have an equal role to help bring poverty to an end. It is not impossible because this year marks the 35th anniversary of the World Day to Overcome Extreme Poverty and the 30th anniversary of the International Day for the Eradication of Poverty. Now, the day honors the millions of people suffering from poverty and is supposed to remind us about our shared responsibility for all of us who can to do all we can to help eradicate poverty and combat all forms of discrimination. The theme for Poverty Eradication Day 2022 on Monday is Dignity for All in Practice. And that seeks to underline that the dignity of the human being is not only a fundamental right in itself, but constitutes the basis of all other fundamental rights. Therefore, dignity, the word dignity, as seen by the United Nations, is not an abstract concept. Instead, it belongs to each and every one. Today, right now, many people living in persistent poverty do experience their dignity being denied and disrespected consistently. According to internationally documented figures, 1.3 billion people, with a capital B, still live in what is called multidimensional poverty, with almost half of them being children and youth. And that's only those who are documented. Further, inequalities of opportunities and income are sharply on the rise. And each year, the gap between the rich and the poor gets even wider. In the past year, for example, from 2021 to now, October, as we saw and heard, while millions struggled to make it to another day, the billionaires of the world, the Elon Musk, the Jeff Bezos, the Mark Zuckerbergs, and the Bill Gates, they all made more money than ever before out of COVID and during the supply chain crisis and since the Ukraine war started. Now, guess what? They're racing to make money conquering space and sending earthlings out of the Earth's atmosphere and space on the space satellite taxis, charging by the millions per minute to who can afford. And there are those who can afford. That's why they launch in the industry. And there are many. And that is why we want to see that they have to stop trying to use Uber space taxi systems. By the time that happens, touring space for 5 minutes without an astronaut as a driver, folks, by the time that gets around, it will be too late. But serious jokes aside, poverty and inequality are not inevitable. Instead, they are the result of deliberate decisions or inaction that disempower the poorest and marginalized in our societies and violate their fundamental rights. The silent and sustained violence of poverty makes it harder for people trapped in extreme poverty to escape, and it denies their humanity. The COVID-19 pandemic highlighted this, exposing gaps and failures in social protection systems, as well as structural inequalities and diverse forms of discrimination that deepen and perpetuate poverty. In addition, the climate emergency constitutes new violence against people living in poverty, that is, poor people, as their communities are unduly burdened by more frequent occurrences of natural disasters and environmental degradation, leading to the destruction of their homes, their crops, and their livelihoods. Just look at the sustained damage Hurricane Ian did to the United States after leaving a trail of destruction in the Caribbean. And look at the floods drowning Pakistan and Nigeria today as we speak. Hundreds of thousands of homes and tens of millions of people have been displaced with nowhere to live, to sleep, or to eat. Pakistan is seeking $30 million to help over 30 million people, $1 per person. But the G7 nations, the world's 7 richest countries, have instead pledged tens of billions of dollars to the war machine in Ukraine. In a world characterized by an unprecedented level of economic development, technological means, and financial resources, that millions of persons are living in extreme poverty is nothing but a global and moral outrage. Poverty, we must understand, is not solely an economic issue, but rather a whole of many parts that include a lack of both income and the basic capabilities to live in dignity. Persons living in poverty experience many interrelated and mutually reinforcing deprivations that prevent them from realizing their rights and perpetuate their poverty, and these include dangerous work conditions, unsafe housing, lack of nutritious food, unequal access to justice, lack of political power, and limited access to health care. So then, how to eradicate poverty? Like I said earlier, many hold that is impossible to eradicate poverty, because as long as there is rich people, there will always be poor, and as the rich get rich off the backs of the poor. But there are also those who hold that while there will always be rich and poor, poverty can be reduced and eventually alleviated on the way to eradication, resulting in most countries interested in the subject opting to settle for poverty reduction instead of poverty eradication. But the United Nations has set a certain yardstick to measure poverty, and many nations have adopted those measurements as the basis to start trying to reduce poverty on the road to eradication. But just in case you might ask, the country that the United Nations says has achieved the highest marks by its measure, and which is regarded by the UN as the first to achieve the Sustainable Development Goal of poverty eradication, is the country with the second largest population in the world, China. So folks, right here, the new government introduced a poverty reduction fund in 1997, which has been renamed Social Development Fund and what have you, and which has changed home from Leslie Land to the Millennium Highway to now the John Compton Highway, all aimed at providing employment opportunities and helping persons living at and below the poverty line to step out of that line where possible. Of course, there's a very vast difference between poverty and unemployment, so it would be wrong to measure poverty by unemployment, because you can be unemployed but not poor. But that's another topic for another day, and today, as we prepare to observe World Poverty Day or International Day for Elimination of Poverty on Monday, October 17th, the day after World Food Day, and the same day as we observe the Magwit Flower Festival here, let's remember that the theme for 2022 is dignity for all in practice. And if anything, let's not forget that poor people are human beings too, who have dignity as well, and deserve our respect of their dignity in practice. So, thanks to Dr. Morgan Dalfini, thanks to Monsignor Dr. Patrick Anthony, and thanks to Dame Paulette Louisi. I'm your host, Earl Bousquet, saying thanks for joining us today for another presentation. We want to thank the support we got from the Cultural Development Foundation, from the Folk Research Center, from the Government Information Service, from the National Communications Network, and on behalf of the National Reparations Committee, I am saying bye for now until next time.